What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Be Less Unfit podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pogue. I'm sitting here in beautiful Boulder, Colorado with my friend Anna Hartman. Anna and I met in San Diego with Ryan and Missy, who are also on here, and they have an episode with me on pain and how your body responds to that. And Anna is an athletic trainer, and an athletic trainer you particularly would probably notice is the person running on the field, helping the ankle get taped, person got hit by a ball, something in that capacity. And what they really look at is return to play, but they're not necessarily looking at it in a return to play, not that they can't, from a clinical, you're putting you on a table and I have 6 weeks before you're after surgery, right? Like they have to both respond in that setting after that or in the moment. And I think there's a lot of people out there right now who they're not quite, they've been cleared by their whatever ailment, surgery, hip surgery, knee surgery, ACL, shoulder for years, but they quite haven't developed the confidence into going to start training or working out or pressing that button a little harder. And, Anna works with high-level professional athletes who, as we all know, have pretty strong egos about getting back on the field and doing what they do really well. And it's really hard to look at these athletes and tell them to stop doing something because they're phenomenal at it. And they're so good, they don't even know that it's hard, right? You're like, I need you to not jump as high as you can every time you jump. What do you mean? Like, I get that you just barely have to put effort into jumping 50 inches off the ground, but like, don't put that much force on the ground, right? And there's moderation and control. And I think there's an education for where we can start looking at how to get ourselves to want to start moving our body, how to get our confidence into, oh, you got a bum shoulder after years of football? How to at least get comfortable getting down on the ground and being able to crawl on the ground with your kids and doing a push-up and then maybe getting the confidence to like reach overhead, right? So maybe we can get to the point of playing catch as the kid gets older, right? We're not saying that you're going to be throwing 90-mile-an-hour heaters off the mound, right? But we're also like, let's get you out of the fear that your bodies can't do anything again. And I think I was writing this morning around that idea around that magical age of 30 that, our parents used to say like, oh, because, my parents don't work out. They didn't go to the gym. And so, it was constantly, you hear it like when you turn 30, the body just wakes up and you feel like shit. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, if you haven't worked since you got out of the school, which would be 18 or 21 and whatever kind of that capacity, like 9 years of not movement, your body's probably going to tell you it feels like shit. And so I think, but now working out is so prevalent. Working out is such a common thing to go do or train. And even if it's something you don't do, it's something that you know you should do or think is good for you, right? And it's in our faces and whatever guilt. This isn't about body composition. It's about moving to feel good. And that's what I'm all about. I don't care how much you lift. I don't care how hard you train in terms of like, I do kettlebell this or blah, this flow. I really don't give a shit. I care about you moving your body because it makes you feel good. And that way it allows you to go do all the other things you want to do in your life. If that's riding bikes with your kids and playing Frisbee, like great, but walking every day is going to help you feel better to go do that. And I hope we at least develop that. And we have to start by pulling back the reins and saying, okay, I'm not going to be worried about that past thing I had or the ailment. I'm not going to become my ailment. I'm going to now say, okay, here's how I respond. And so Anna is here to help talk to us about how to gain that confidence and getting back to return to play and developing like, what do I need to know? Because at the end as a coach, we need to give you confidence and autonomy so you can go do the thing on your own, right? Anna and I are going to be with you all day, every day. So can you leave today with something where it's, oh, here's how I can be more confident in what I know I need to start doing to make my ankle better so I can do the hikes I want to do, right? We know like, oh, I should do those ankle exercises and we never do them, right? Because they're probably the same boring ones you had out of surgery. And they don't make you feel like it's progressive, like it didn't get you anywhere in the first place. So what do we need to know about injuries and how do we take that info and what do we take today and say, okay, here's how I attack those problems so that way I can get back out there, inevitably, playing whatever sport that you want to do. So without further ado, Anna Hartman, thank you very much for joining me. What's up?
Yes, I'm so happy to be here and chat with you. I love talking shop about pretty much everything, the body, wellness, anatomy, injury. So I'm stoked to talk to you about all of this stuff. I'm writing notes as you talked. So I'm like, oh yeah, this. I gotta mention this. So
you can see it when people are like,
fired up.
Like it's so funny. And I sometimes when I do podcasts with people, they're like, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, don't worry, I will not put you in a position where you can't go off, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna my goal is to throw you cherry bombs and just watch you go, hey, what's up?
Yes.
So tell people a little bit about what athletic training is and how you got into it, and where that kind of sits differently than the other fitness voices coming out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So athletic training, you described it just how I would describe it to people, because most of the time when people hear athletic trainer, they think personal trainer, because of the word trainer after it. And the easiest way that people recognize is, like you said, when somebody gets hurt on the field, when you're watching a sporting event, it's the people that run out to take care of them. That is just a small part of the large scope of practice that an athletic trainer actually can do. That is a little bit also the problem with the profession, is we have such a large scope of practice that we lose our identity of what we are and who we do. You have people like that are like solely with a team, and their primary role is making sure people are safe during practice, safe during the game, taken care of in situations where they get hurt, and then making sure they get the right thing happen after that, whether that's to the doctor, to the hospital, to rehab, the immediate return to play within like the next game, or going on the DL and doing like a longer, or the IL, excuse me, or a longer rehab. And so the rest of it though is also more of where I live. I don't live in that traditional world of athletic training. I live more on the rehabilitation preventative side of things, more of the performance therapy end of the spectrum. And like you said, I work mainly with professional athletes, and I travel with them often. And so, for example, my football players, I'm there right after the game on their off days. So if they got beat up in the game, I'm there to make sure that they feel better by the time they get back into the facility and practice on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, ready for the game. Or some of those guys, I actually go there right before the game, Friday, Saturday, and again, make sure that anything that happened previous week or during practices, they're ready to go for that. And so it's a lot of sometimes patchwork, decreasing pain, decreasing swelling, getting their nervous system turned back on, or getting their nervous system in a state of balance so it can heal itself better. And then with them, it's, in terms of return to play, they're already exercising. So I don't need to give them exercises most of the time. I need to teach them how to take care of themselves, learn about their body, why it hurts, how to change that input to get a different output, and teach them how to do that when I'm not there as well. And then the other role of athletic trainers is a physician extender. So some athletic trainers work in doctors' offices and sort of triage the patient, just like they would do on the field. So that's why they're a perfect physician extender, is because if you rolled your ankle playing basketball this weekend, you could go into a doctor's office in some areas and see an athletic trainer first, and the athletic trainer can determine, does this person need to see the doctor because they maybe have a fracture and need an x-ray, or can I deal with them and teach them about what is an ankle sprain, what happens, exercises to like do in the interim, and then follow back up with them or refer them to physical therapy or something like that. So it's actually a really large scope of practice. Then you have athletic trainers working in businesses, as same thing, sort of. If somebody has a low back pain from sitting in the chair all day, they might employ an athletic trainer to help deal with that. And so then that's a little bit more in the wellness area than athletic trainers in the tactical settings too, which some of the athletic trainers in the tactical settings, if you're working on a base, a lot of times in like what's it called? Like when the beginning, like training camp for the military, when they're
boot camp?
just like boot camp. So if you're an athletic trainer or boot camp, you have 3 days to get the guy back ready, or he gets kicked out and goes to the next round of boot camp. And so that's a very different situation too for athletic trainers. But then you have some athletic trainers that work in the military in their hospitals and are dealing with people after bigger injuries, losing limbs, traumatic brain injury, that kind of thing. So again, like I said at the beginning, the scope of practice of athletic training is just so large, which actually to me is what makes it such a cool profession, because you can do manual therapy, you can evaluate people, you can do rehab, you can do emergency care, like you know, you can do wound care. There's just so much. And so if you don't like the blood and gore kind of stuff of emergency care, but you love the rehab type of thing, then you're a little bit more like me. And so it's just, it's what makes it hard to understand the profession, but also really exciting. And especially nowadays where everybody's sort of creating their own path and not going down to the tradition, it provides a lot more opportunities for us in a profession that has a very high level of burnout, and people who are like leave the profession because they're like, I can't work 60-hour weeks anymore at the high school, college, or, you know, professional sports. And so it's exciting times for athletic training in that sense of we're realizing that our scope of practice allows us a lot more reach with people, and a lot more fulfillment as a professional to be able to help people and stay doing what we love, which is helping people and working with the body and getting people well. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. I didn't realize it had such a broad scope. I realized that you were able to do the manual and obviously diagnosing, or at least in that space, but you're like, oh, I didn't think about it applicably doing so much, right?
Yes.
And it's pretty phenomenal to think about, you know, these organizations and how many people it takes to keep this like 70 group of guys healthy, you know, when you're paying them $30 million a year. You're like, or some organizations who choose not to put that resources in, you're like, and they hire people privately, right? You're like, wow, you guys don't even have a massage therapist on staff, and you what? Like, okay, like it's phenomenal. But you know, whether it's, you know, you wanting to get back out and be able to play catch with your kid, or trying to get back on the field to get paid, return to play is tough, right? Because it's not just up to your ego and like how hard you want to go, no matter how great of an athlete you are. Like, you see like Kurt Schilling pitch with like a cut, you know, a freshly sutured ankle. There's phenomenons like that, but that's game 6 of the World Series or ALCS, right? Like, yeah, you do that.
Yeah.
We see a lot of people prioritize winning the workout in day-to-day life when it's like, oh, was that probably the best thing for your longevity?
Right.
Probably not. And so then we get beat up. And so I think there's just a lot of people who just, and myself included, because I don't come from an educated background in fitness, I'm having to play catch up all the time, is what is trauma to the tissue, or what is trauma to the joint? When we hear, like, when you're watching Monday Night Football and you hear, oh, it's a grade 2 hamstring or a high ankle sprain, like, how do we even diagnose those? Like, I'm thinking about, even like, as my parents, if we're in a tournament in middle of nowhere, Washington, right? Like, there ain't an athletic trainer here.
Right.
Like, it's going to be your parents doing the best. My dad putting a splint on it, right? Because he knows how, with probably 2 sticks from a tree he pulled down off the whatever, right? And with a belt. How do we diagnose, or how do we look at that? And what do we need to know about these traumas? And then we'll look at how do we progress after them?
Right. Well, that's a big question, and there's a lot to unpack in that. But like, first of all, kind of like you were saying with Kurt Schilling, like, Kurt's a special person. Not many people would do that. Right. But then also you got, like, people forget that how much money these athletes are getting paid for that too. Like, so it's like risk versus reward, right? He had the reward of the millions of dollars he was getting paid and the potential of winning a world championship, on top of all the pain-killing drugs in the world that he couldn't even feel his foot, right? So, and really great rehab staff that was there helping him at the time. And so, yeah, like you said, like, Joe Schmo is in the gym and is like fighting through it because, like, well, you know, Kurt Schilling could do it with a bloody sock. Why can't I get through this workout? And it's like, well, what is your reward for getting that? So I ask that question to everyone, not like my professional athletes, and like when I see someone's mom, what is your reward? Like, why are you doing it? Does it make you feel a certain way? A lot. And then it's like, you get down to the deeper why of why somebody's doing it, you know, which could take us down a whole different rabbit hole to talk about that. But I'll get back to your trauma question. So in terms of like what happens when you get injured, it kind of just depends on the injury. If you know, sometimes you can have an injury that happens and feels painful, but doesn't actually create a whole lot of trauma in the tissues. And it doesn't take away that it might be painful and limit your movement somehow, but it means that you have a different scenario for making yourself feel better and get back to what you love doing, versus if you do have a lot of trauma to the tissues. Like if you pull a muscle and then within 24 hours you have a ton of bruising and swelling, that's a lot of trauma to the tissue. Your path to getting back to what you're wanting to do is very different than if I'm running and I feel like I pull a muscle, but then I don't have any of that noticeable tissue trauma, right? So I just have the sensation of pain or the sensation of tightness. That would lead me down a different path. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. You'll find some people have that really gross traumatic tissue injury and actually get better quicker than someone who has something that seemingly is not that big of a deal, but that pain and tightness just lingers and lingers and lingers, and it can't, and they're out for two months or more because they can't figure out how to change that output, right? And so that's when it's so important to be able to have some professional to go to help you figure out where you're at. But then ultimately, like you said, we don't all have access to that because of where we live, because of how much money we make, because of what healthcare we have, because of the time we have. And so what I tend to preach to all people is that our body inherently can heal itself and can guide you in the right direction if you know how to listen to it and create this communication. When you can learn how to listen and communicate with your body, you build trust in your body too, which is going to be so big at coming back to be able to do the things you love. The problem is people's egos get in the way. They think they know what's best for their body, or they put their trust in a professional. They think their doctor has the answers. They think their athletic trainer has the answers. They think their physical therapist has the answers, or their strength coach has the answers. And they put all their trust in them instead of in their body. And I totally flipped the script for people because I'm like, listen, I don't want you to trust me more than you trust your body. Everything I tell you and teach you about your body, I want you to learn how to feel it in your body. And when you can tap into your body and know that, like, oh, my ankle hurt when I single leg balance, and then I did this thing, and I single leg balance again, and my ankle didn't hurt. That's the communication I want you to trust. Not because I told you that intervention was going to make a difference. Yeah. That's the connection that I see everyone missing across the board. Well, whether it's someone's mom, grandma, or professional athlete, is they've forgotten that step of like, how is my body feeling right now? Where am I starting? Provide an intervention, whatever that may be. And then how do I feel now? It's that check-in process that's so important, and that teaches you to trust your body. And when you can trust your body, there is so much more value into that, from a sensory experience, from a confidence experience, from a getting back to return to play. And then it also empowers you to learn how to take care of yourself and not feel like you have to rely on people. When people ask me what I consider myself, when I consider myself to be successful, or what is successful to me, it's to know that my athletes don't need me. If I have done my job well, if something can come up and maybe they call me and tell me, and I give them some tools, but they can navigate that check-in, use the tools, figure out the outcome. That means that I don't want you using these tools just because I said so. I want you using them because they work. So if I gave you 3 tools and on your pre-check-in and your post-check-in, they didn't do anything, then call me back and I'll give you other tools to try. Don't use those bullshit tools if they're not working, which is the whole problem when you give people home exercise programs, why there's no buy-in, because it's not working or they're not paying attention. If someone pays attention and feels a change from point A to point B, they will do those things every day, 20 times a day. I promise you. Right? And so it's like, again, it doesn't matter the level. They have buy-in because they felt it in their body, and now they can trust their body. And then they've seen that, oh my gosh, I can make myself feel better. Or sometimes they'll be like, Anna, you made me feel so much better. And I'm like, no, I didn't do it. You did it. Your body made you feel better. And so I think that is like a huge missing piece in all levels of rehab and return to play is building in that check-in process and that autonomy and ownership of understanding how to take care of yourself, not just as like a hashtag on Instagram, like Self-Care Sunday, but like an actual, like, what does it mean to take care of yourself? And what it means is to like get quiet and pay attention to what you're feeling, not what you're thinking, because your thinking is your ego mind. Right?
Absolutely. You know, it's so interesting that in the word of using tone and muscle, it's typically looked at like, I want to go tone my muscles is the marketing message. And it's so frustrating because like, oh, people battle. It's like, oh, okay. And there are studies that are trying to prove this, but like toning specific areas based on exercises you do. But really, like when we look at tone, we're looking at it from like a sympathetic tone or a parasympathetic tone. Like, is that tissue like ramped up,
Right.
or is that tissue like soft and supple? And when we start, you know, I think people have become very aware of tightness, right? Like, you know, early in our careers, we watched the role of the foam roller really come to get popular and trigger points in this idea. And then all of a sudden, fascia got really popular. Like, oh, it's not just about adhesions. Actually, it takes more manual therapy to break down a knot in your muscle. But like, oh, there's a superficial layer on top called fascia, and that needs hydration. That needs to get moved. And then that connects to our neurology and like that tissue, you know. So now we're becoming really aware, and we're watching the market take off with these guns. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. Like these I was trying to do this, and I was like, should I do that? I don't know if that looks anyway, like the hypervolt guns, and congrats to those guys. I mean, in the clubhouse, like, but you also see it on the other end where like I walk in a 24-hour fitness and I see someone like massaging their clients back. I'm like, okay, like I could if you told me why that was happening, I could like, okay, cool. It's probably not the answer I would get from you, right, in that setting. But we're seeing it, and it's like, okay, let's talk about tone of muscle and restriction and freedom and tightness and that trust, right? Because that's where a lot of people are like, oh, it's tight, I don't want to go there. And you're like, oh, okay, what is that? Because there is a difference, and people need to understand that there's a difference in those two sensations. And I think that helps us understand the awareness of at least developing trust. Like, bro, like, hey, I get that it's tight, but like, okay, just check in. It's not, your arm ain't gonna fall off. It's just your arm, right? Like, how does that feel? What else is getting angry? Oh, you feel it over here in your back left, like hip area? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can buy that. Yeah. Right? Like, let's put you in a stance over here and like, let's stretch that hip and like, oh, that shoulder feel better? Yeah. Cool. Right? Like, but a lot of people won't venture into that world because someone has told them, don't go there. Right. And so now we aren't able to decipher between tight and what that tone is. So can you talk a little bit about that, and how do you explain that to your people?
Absolutely. So first, you know, what you're describing of like the foam roll and the hypervolt and all that stuff is like, again, that's like outsourcing your trust in something else other than your body. Unless you're using those as tools where you've done a check-in and now you're using the tool and then you recheck in, but that doesn't happen very often. And so it's always like, it's not necessarily a bad tool or a good tool. It's just like, are you even checking to see if it's a good or bad tool? And that's what's missed. But then, you know, two is, I always tell people, like, as smart as our brain and our nervous system is, and like as smart as we are, as much wisdom as we contain in our body, for some reason, sometimes the only words that come out when we go to describe something is tight. And so it's like, therefore, perhaps the word tight is kind of like it's like a garbage word. When somebody tells me they feel tight, I don't put a whole lot of weight in it. And if anything, I view it as like, okay, yeah, your nervous system is not granting you some sort of range of motion because you haven't earned it. And you haven't earned it because, like, for some reason, your nervous system doesn't feel safe. Now, it might not feel safe because of the environment you're in. It might not feel safe because you have pain somewhere. It might not feel safe because there's an organ not moving well in the area, you know, whether that organ be like a big organ in our abdomen or our chest, or that organ be a small organ in our limbs, like a nerve or vascular structure, right? If they're not able to glide very well, the muscles are like bodyguards. They tighten up. neurologically to not allow a range of motion to happen, because if the nerve's not gliding, then its only option is to stretch. And nerves and vascular structures, they do not like to stretch. They do not like compression, and they do not like stretch. And so if they feel like that's going to happen, then the body's like, oh crap, prevent that range of motion, and the muscles and the joints like, gotcha, right? So because a body would rather tear a muscle, rather injure a ligament than injure a nerve or a vascular structure. Those are so much more important to the body than the muscles and the ligaments. And also because the muscles and ligaments, they heal really fast. They recover a lot. Plus muscles are big. Like if you pull a little part of your quad, you have let's see, it's square footage. Like if you're thinking about it in like the land of bigness, like let's say your quad is 500 square feet and you pull 1 square foot of it, you have 499 square feet still ready to go, right? And so it's like so many times I'll have athletes come in with like a grade 3 quad strain, and I'll get the nerve in that area to glide better. And then they have no pain and no lack of function. And they're like, how is that possible? On the MRI, I show tissue damage. And I'm like, yeah, because you have a ton of other quad doing the same job as that little
quad.
Yes, exactly. So that's what it is usually, is when people are feeling tight and lacking range of motion, it's their nervous system is not feeling safe. So then it's like, how can I make my nervous system feel safe? And you can get that many ways. And you can get that by strengthening. You can get that sometimes by mobility and getting joints to move through a range of motion. You can get that sometimes with a hypervolt and some sort of sensory stimulus. You can get that by laughing. You can get that by smiling. You can get that by breathing, right? So it's like, what trick do you want to use to convince the nervous system that it's safe? Once you've convinced it's safe, now you have to take that opportunity to train in that so that it becomes a more of a long-term thing, right? So Shante Cofield, the movement maestro, always says this quote, when she's talking about the nervous system, which she got from someone else, and I can't remember who, but it's like, the nervous system is easily convinced, but not, now it's like lost it. The nervous system is easily fooled maybe, but not easily convinced, meaning that you can trick it. It's easily tricked, but not easily convinced. You can trick it, but oftentimes it kind of goes back into that tight pattern. And so it's sort of like, that's where the tools come in, is the tools are a way to trick the nervous system. And then once you have that range of motion, you have to go and own it through strength and mobility and the movement patterns. And here's the key: have a positive movement experience, right? You need to feel. It always comes back to feeling, right? If I gained shoulder range of motion, if I was lacking, and let's say it was a nervous system thing, and I created a little bit more stability, maybe just with a breath hold, and I got more range of motion, great. We've tricked my nervous system into feeling safe. Now, if I take a moment to be like, man, what does it feel like to have my shoulder do that, and describe it in a positive way, I am more likely to be convinced that it's a safe thing to do, and my brain will keep it, right? And that's, I think, something that people miss too. And so I'm constantly asking people to describe how they feel, because I'm looking for them to have that positive movement experience. And because that positive movement experience is what is easily replicated, because the way we store a movement experience in our brain, when it's a positive movement experience like that, it gets stored automatically, because it goes to a different part of your brain than like, okay, I need to exhale and then slide my shoulder blade around and lift my arm up, and that, okay, that's full range of motion. That will do great within the set. But until I'm like, oh, that is like free, and I can feel my shoulder blade slide, and it's like, oh, I feel so like it feels like a slip and slide. Like, and then that thinking of a slip and slide makes me think of memories of being a kid on a slip and slide, and I smile and I enjoy that movement. Boom, that is what keeps it. And so I think that, that is when we start to like realize, I think even more, how much that tight feeling was actually the nervous system speaking to us.
Yeah.
So words like tight and heavy, when limbs feel heavy, or just when your body feels heavy, I've found that those are words that usually end up leading us to the nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great, I mean, and a lot of it, like you mentioned it with, an MRI scan, a grade 3, and it's about, the nerve and the person being able to go out and do things. And I think we've gotten, I mean, obviously medicine's great and having MRIs available is amazing, right? But how many people have let that diagnosis become them, right? And, on one end of the spectrum, we have people who like never want to venture into it. Like, oh, don't go in there just so I don't get hurt. And then you have on the other end, your athletes who are like, F it. I don't care. I'm still that good.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able, but either way, like you're saying, it's not necessarily like you can say grade 3, grade 2, and there's a specific diagnosis. It's like, are you ready for it? Right. Like something I tell people with post-surgery, I don't care if it's my athlete or like general, whoever, it's like, it's training such a safe environment. Like even the shitty, terrible trainers, like it's a fairly controlled environment for you to be deadlifting, like you can feel, right? It's the, like, I always look for like oh, are you ready to miss the last stair when you're not paying attention? And like that, right? Like you're like, oh, you okay, I'm ready to go. Mm-hmm. Right now I'm ready to sprint bases, right? Or whatever that is. It's like that, oh, I turned and forgot my keys and my back didn't like getting into the car. Like that's the thing that's like training, like we're going to rotate ball, throw, things. It's controlled, right? It's the whatever that is, like you said, it's your body feeling safe. In that setting, how is it like, how do we help people understand how much to go, right? Like, because I think that, I love David Goggins' book, and I think he's a very motivational person from a motivational setting. From my fitness setting, I'm like, oh my God, please don't run out of broken tibia for 1,000 miles. But like, dude, you're a freak that you did it. Cool. Like, and he went through some shit. So like when you're that emotionally charged, I think that's a really good note for the nervous system, is like, yeah, your body can withstand a lot of pain when there's other things it's dealing with. Right. But people want to know, like, how do I know I'm safe? Right. Like, because I think re-injuring is maybe more scary than the first injury for a lot of people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, is there something that how do you self-regulate that for your people? Like, so they can do it on their own. Like, ooh, that hurt, but like, okay, that was safe. That feels good. And developing that body awareness. Cause I think that's a lot of things that we have developed through years of being in the setting and doing it. But like, how do I teach my mom that to understand what the difference between that hurts and, okay, I feel it working,
Yeah. So I think, at the beginning of what you're saying, like what it comes down to is that trust component, right? When people believe diagnoses from an MRI or an X-ray or a doctor's label, an actual diagnosis, right? Like what they write on the paper and submit to insurance. Again, you're putting your trust in something other than yourself and how you feel. And so it's like, I'm always going to go back to that. It's like, we have to teach people again how to trust themselves. And we do that through creating better body awareness, which was your next question, is like, how do you do that? Well, through touch, our sensory experience. If you watch a baby, it's how they learn about their body, is they exploit the senses. So first they smell it and taste it and see it. And then they realize once they have their vision, they are like, holy, what is this? Like they see their hand, and then they're like, feel their hand and realize that it feels stuff, and they bring it to their mouth because that's their normal touch organ that develops first. That's why it's like, you can't tell a kid to not put something in their mouth. They are neurologically like made to do that because that is how they're experiencing the world. It's like they're constantly comparing this to that, right? And so once they notice their hands, they start touching everything around them as their vision gets better. That's what actually gets them to move, is that integration of, oh, eyes to hand. I see something over there. I want to touch it. I want to feel it, right? I used to have all these rock mats and loose rocks in my office. when I was in Arizona, and whenever people brought their kids in, first thing they would do, there's two areas of the room. They'd go to the rocks and go to the basket of balls, and they'd start pulling stuff out and touching. No permission was needed, because it's their nervous system being like, oh, I just want to explore, because exploring is the way I figure out my relationship to the environment or space, my relationship to gravity. And the better I understand my relationship to gravity and the space around me and the environment, the better I'm going to move and be able to navigate through life. And, and then the baby goes on to touch the other parts of their body. As their diaphragm drops down, as their head control comes into online, their legs come up, and then they realize they have hands at the bottom of their legs, and they're like, what? And so then they want to feel with those guys too. And if you see a baby, and when it's, like 4 to 6 months, and it's sitting unsupported, it starts using its hands to grab its toys and steady its toys. Use its feet to grab its toys and steady the toys, just like the hands. And so then eventually they start loading, but they want, the proper loading and movement pattern through our feet comes through that sensory experience too, which is why it's like, don't put your kids' shoes are super cute. I'm not going to lie. They're super cute, but they're like the worst thing you could do for their movement patterns, right? Because they need that sensory. It's the worst thing we can do for adults' movement patterns too, but especially as the kids are developing. But so touch is an important part. The sensory experience is the important part of mapping our body, right? So it is better mapped in our brain. The better map we have of our body and our brain, the better we're going to move. And the more we're going to have this awareness of ourself, right? I say most people are like floating heads. They have no awareness of anything below the neck. And so the first step is like learning about what's below your neck. And most adults, and most people, once they're like, I'd say like, I don't know, 7 or 8 and older, they actually love learning about their body. They like to understand what the anatomy is. And so I teach it to them. I teach kids that young of age. I start, it's like head, shoulders, knees, and toes game, right? That's an important part of your evolution, is learning about your parts, which that goes down a whole society thing of like, touching yourselves and, your intimate parts. Like how many people, I was one of those people who grew up with their mom taking the mirror and like looking at your private parts because it was important to understand what was down there. And it's shocking to me how many of my friends, as we've talked over the years, that never had that experience. And it's like, you've never seen your private parts? Like, no wonder it's so taboo to talk about incontinence and, other issues in our pelvic regions, because you don't even know what it looks like. And so same thing goes for like our scapula, right? Like it's on the back of our body. You've never actually seen your own scapula before, right? Unless you've taken the moment to look at it in the mirror or feel it. And so it starts with that. So sometimes simply when especially from an injury standpoint, with injuries, we get even more of a blurry map. And so I'll take people, like, let's say they had a shoulder injury, and I'll hand them either a picture of a scapula or a plastic scapula bone, and I'll put it in their hands, and then I'll have them tap along the edges of the bones as I tap along the edge of the bone on their scapula. Because I want them to be like, oh, that's what it is. I see, like, oh, there's a curve to it. So it lives on a curve of my rib cage. Interesting. And then, so it's like, I'll help them map that. So it's like, now that you're more aware that you have this thing on your backside and that actually pushes your arm up overhead, you're going to be more likely to move it correctly. And so it's this combination of teaching people the anatomy and embodying it. It doesn't have to be like so scientific, but it has to be a little bit scientific, because it's our body parts. Like, why not be scientific? You want to have as much body literacy as you can, because that makes you a more informed consumer of the wellness industry and health and healthcare, right? You're going to be better able to tell the doctor where you hurt, especially this day and age with the virtual call, if you know anatomy, and you can be like, or if you can point to it. But it's like, if you've never spent any time paying attention to all your parts, then it makes it hard to be able to communicate both with yourself and other people regarding your body. And when you don't have that awareness, you start to lose that trust, right? And so it's like they go hand in hand. And then also moving the joints and all the range of motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Joints have really rich proprioceptors that communicate to the part of the cerebellum as well as the rest of our brain, and that tells us where we are in space. And so when you can move a joint through full range of motion in all the directions, you give so much rich information to where you are in space. And so it's using our sensory organs, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our lips, our mouth, our hands and feet, and then also our joint receptors. And then the role of self-massage then becomes talking to the interoceptors, talking to the rest of the receptors in the fascia of where our soft tissue is in space, which is so important too. And probably why foam rolling and self-massage is so beneficial. It's not necessarily breaking up adhesions, but it's mapping our body better, and it's getting us to pay attention to how we feel, especially if you do it right.
Yeah. It's so interesting to watch the influence of media and how it plays into what information we get, right? So I'm only in this industry as a factor that it's a weekend cert kind of thing, right? And like I've been able to go to a lot of education and be in the right rooms with a lot of people, and I've learned to know what's what and where things actually go. But I also was pushed in a way based on what's trendy to a certain extent, right? But it just, thankfully, my first exposure to people was like people who valued Gray Cook and Mark Ripperto and Wendler. It was like, oh, so you're learning. It was right at the height of functional fitness, right? That's starting to come into play. And I really, I foam rolled. I was that person who probably foam rolled for like 20 minutes every day before my workout because it felt good, right? Like, and then I'd go lift and I could squat real deep and do the thing. And then as I got more influenced by like FRC and Perry Nicholson and Mark Chang, and you start seeing different ways to approach things. And so I really got away from foam rolling just because I'm like, I don't need to use that as a tool. Let me see if I can move. And so I'm doing a lot of animal flow, a lot of whatever terminology people want to use. And then recently, like, I realized, like, you know what? I always thought like my thoracic erectors were like just because they're super thick and hyper developed because I've had tight hips. And I was like, ooh, as I'm moving around, I'm like, you know what? They actually feel pretty good. I'm like, I think my QL super just locked down. I'm like, oh yeah, lateral flexion is really tight, right? And so it's just like low. And then like I was texting with Mark Chang, and he was like, oh yeah, just try just jump on a foam roll with your quads. Tell me how that feels. I was like, oh yeah, that And I was like, oh, I just got away from it, right? Like because we get influenced by what's around, and there's such a bigger picture to health and wellness, right? Like it's my hope to help educate people that fitness is less about sets and reps. Like, sure thing, that's how we measure tool, like just like a baking recipe is it's sets and reps, and like that's how you define what is going to happen and what you're trying to do. But like if people walked away with like you just did a total body movement session, yoga thingy, right? And then like you walked, like that would be my hope for most people from a fitness. But then the lifter in me is like, well, I want to like strengthen things and progressively overload things, but I want people to have permission to just to move. And I think that's such an important thing, and that movement gets so restricted by fear and trauma. One more thing I want to bring up around trauma, just to like help people understand, is if something happens acutely, like you're in a hike and you turn your ankle over, right? Like, what do we need to know? What do we need to know about that kind of information when that happens in the moment, about what to do next? And what, like, let's talk about rice and that like setting real quick, because there are people saying like ice isn't good, whatever. But what happens when someone, like, I roll my ankle on a hike, I throw my back out, I might tweak my knee, what do I need to do?
Right. Well, I mean, man, if you roll your ankle on a hike or something and you still have to get to your car, ideally you want to do it in the most pain-free way as possible. So my biggest thing is like, take a moment, catch your breath, like calm down, because there's this, especially if you've had other experiences of pain in the past, the output of pain might be very great regardless of how severe the trauma to your ankle is. And so it's like, first let's get a hold of that. So it's like, assess the situation, make sure it's not broken, there's no bones sticking out and that you need to call in an emergency or, stop bleeding at a artery, right? Like the general ABCs of emergency care need to happen first. And then it's like, okay, you got your airway, you're breathing fine, your circulation's good, there's no open wounds. All right, now you're just in pain. Where to go from there? And it's like, okay, same thing. How can you make your body feel safe, right? So it's like, maybe it's taking a second before you go down and doing some eye exercises, because vision is like a really strong way to assess, because your body, so you did the ABC check, airway, breathing, and circulation, but then it's like, okay, now you need to convince your body that you're safe. Like there's nothing around you that's going to hurt. Like, yes, your ankle's hurting, but that's it. You're fine. You're not going to die. You need to remind your nervous system of that. So it's like, do some vision exercises. Maybe that's some eye circles. Maybe just do some long exhale breaths to connect into the, parasympathetic nervous system. Maybe that's doing some breath holds to get that nitric oxide to relax our nervous system. Maybe that's doing some joint range of motion on the opposite leg or the opposite arm and all the joints. Like improving that sensory experience is gonna convince our nervous system that we're safe and decrease your pain quite a bit, right? So especially when you're paying attention, so instead of focusing on the pain you're feeling, do something else in another joint that's pain-free and focus on how that feels, because that interoception, that feeling of how we're feeling on the inside, or even focus on paying attention to your breath, that's interoception. Feel your heart rate, that's interoception. That act of interoception goes right into the insular cortex of our brain, which decreases our pain. And so it's a great way to like quickly downgrade pain, so then you're able to get down the mountain. And then the other thing you have to do is go slower. You just got hurt. Like the slower you can go and like articulate through the motion, it's going to be better for your body in the long run, as opposed to going fast and limping and like throwing your leg out to the side. By the time you get to the bottom of the mountain that way, your back's going to hurt, or your knee's going to hurt, or you're going to put yourself at risk for then hurting your knee on the way down your mountain, right? So it's like, go slow, don't be in a hurry, take breaks, listen to your body. If you're walking on it and you're like, man, the pain is not subsiding, like get in the shade and just take a break. Elevate it if possible, which if it's your ankle, easy way to elevate it, lay on your stomach with your knees bent, like cheerleader pose, right?
I know that one well. I did a lot of photos of that.
So, so there's easy strategies like that. And then once you get down the hill, it's like, where you go from there. So the fundamental thing whenever you get an injury is going to be decrease your pain and decrease any swelling. Don't take anti-inflammatories right out of the gate, because the inflammation process is the healing process. So like whoever was the PR for the inflammation process, they missed the boat. The PR should have been like, this is the healing process, right? And you want the healing process to happen, especially in those first 72 hours. And so it's like, you can still take a painkiller. And this is like the amount of people who don't understand the difference between an anti-inflammatory medicine and a pain relieving medicine. It's mind-boggling to me. And it's like, okay, Advil, Aleve, the things that say non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, those are anti-inflammatories and pain relievers, but anti-inflammatories. So don't take those. Acetaminophen is a pain reliever. That's Tylenol. You can take that, right? But then it's like, if you don't want to take medicine, you can do pain relieving things too, right? I just took you through some of the options, but then the other really easy option to decrease pain is ice. Like ice has gotten a bad rap over the years, and it's just like, I don't understand why. I understand why, because again, the PR for the ice people, maybe somebody understood from the PR people that ice decreased inflammation, and that's not true. It's never been true. When you learn it in school, in athletic training at least, we never learned that. One of the myths we learned is that maybe it decreased the cell's need for oxygen, and then you prevented extra cell death in the area, that may not be true either. But what we learned, the primary reason you use it is because ice is a painkiller. It numbs things. It's a sensory experience of numbing the area, right? Because we're tapping into those receptors, those mechanoreceptors that sense temperature, and that sensory experience is stronger. It's a faster message to the brain than the sensory experience of the injury, which is a nociception, right? Not the same thing as pain. Pain is the output. Nociception is the trauma, perhaps, but temperature, if it's at a level of not painful temperature, right? Because if it's too hot or really too cold, that's a nociception. If it's a little bit cold, it sends the message faster to the brain, and that wins out. And so we don't have pain anymore, right? So it's like ice. Yes, ice. And then elevation, that's the best thing for swelling as well as movement. So gone are the days that we want to brace things and not move, like immobilize the joint. Immobilization is just not the answer unless perhaps you have a fracture. And other than that, you want to mobilize it in a pain-free range of motion to get the muscle pump happening to help the lymph system. And then also you can help the lymph system by clearing the areas at the front of the hip, like the femoral artery, behind the knee, in the calf, at the liver, at the diaphragm, and then under the left clavicle is where the majority of the body drains. So unless you injured the right arm or right side of your head, it's going to be the left clavicle that you want to free the space up. And that'll really help decrease your swelling. So once you have swelling gone and pain gone, then you're like, let's progressively load it. Progressive load is really important in the healing process, because if there was any scar tissue laid down, the progressive loading is what remodels the scar tissue in the lines of directions that you want the scar tissue to be firm and resist the tensile and compressive forces of. So then
Science.
It's like you're off to the science. Then you're off to the races, right? And then yeah, the science tells us like what weeks this is more great than others, but it's like it doesn't matter. Just start progressively loading it.
Yeah, and I think that's the message
and in all the ranges of motion.
Exactly. We're fighting right now, right? Is like those of us in fitness are like, movement is the key to, I mean, just moving the thing, right? We don't want to be the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz, like oil that shit up and just move, right? Like that's your ticket, right? Like, and in whatever capacity.
Yeah.
Right.
In a pain-free range of motion.
That's
and
it.
As slow or fast as you need to keep it pain-free and keep you happy.
And I think we get to the point where, you know, and I still hear it with people my age who hurt their knees or their ankles. They go to their physical therapist, like, hey, just don't do it for a while. I'm like, what? You just got told that? Is it to not move it? Stop. No. Yeah. But it makes sense, right? Like if you're sitting there like, oh, if it's hurt, don't move it, rest it. That's going to help it recover. It doesn't seem intuitive because like, as you're talking about lymph, right? And guys, like lymph is just, I mean, it's not like you have to really dig in there. It's really just tactile touch, right? Like you get a lymph massage, like it makes you want it more.
Skin
like,
stretch,
can you get in there?
Tapping, absolutely, yeah.
And she's talking about sensory input in babies. We got to it earlier, but like knowing your body, right? Like, dry brushing, movement, using the gun, right? The big thing I want people to know about like the foam rolling, especially, or the guns is like, if you're holding your breath locked down, it ain't doing shit, right?
No,
like
it's not rest.
That's why I like the guns. It's because like if I don't have to do a plank to get my quads and I can sit on my butt and like just hammer them out, right? Like that helps me be way less more toned, sympathetic tone as we get back to our earlier conversation. So that muscle, that soft tissue of the muscle has an opportunity to decrease in its tone, right? In its sensory input. And if that is lower tone, well, then maybe if in an application, I can squat deeper because it's not pulling on my hips as much and it creates a better accessibility up the chain, right? So as we're looking at people, you know, we get so much in this injury world to where it's like, yeah, don't move it, right? We heard rest. Some people know about Tylenol and Advil. Some like ice, people are hearing it. Cryo got really popular. So I think ice kind of got its name back. I think inflammation, as we're talking about it, is the thing that we're like, hey, hold on. Inflammation is not bad, right? It's the natural thing that needs to happen, right? And telling our body to not do it because there's an intervention coming in, now we have other things to worry about. but the movement is what flushes things. As we're talking, as we're looking at it from lymph, it's like, yeah, sure, you just rolled your ankle. Quickest thing you need to do is start ankle circles, right? With, as long as you don't have pain, right? Get that thing, and back to what Anna was talking about earlier, is getting that joint like, oh, that doesn't hurt, that doesn't hurt, that doesn't hurt, that doesn't hurt, that doesn't hurt. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, the more you give it, now you can start like, okay, what happens if I stand on one foot? That's progressively more load than not, you know, sitting on your chair doing an ankle circle. And then like, what if you hold a kettlebell? That's more progressive load. So when we look at progressive loading, it doesn't mean that you have to have a barbell with clanging and banging weights. It can also just be incremental. It could be time, it could be volume, it could be a change of environment, right? But building more trust. And that's where the injury thing really comes into play. And that's where I get so sad seeing people not do things with their body. Oh, I'm 40 now, I'm 50 now, my shoulder hurts, I can't do that. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Like, yeah, if you haven't worked with an adaptive athlete, like that changes your world about how you look at moving your body.
Absolutely.
You're like, shit, I don't, like, you see them bombing down a ski hill doing whatever, and they had to lose their legs. You know, it's like, that makes me think about every day differently about how I move my body, right? Like, I have a thing that when I'm standing in line, I'll be the weirdo that fucking squats and moves his body in line. Cause it's like, it's a great opportunity. I have nothing else to do. Yeah. Right. So instead of looking at my phone, I stretch. I'm like, if someone else looks at it, it's like, oh, that dude's willing to be a weirdo in the middle of the public and stretch. I'm like, yeah, but I feel so much better. Right. Like, but like, it's those little things, right? That doesn't have a prescriptive, oh, you did it for 3 sets of 10 and then 3 sets of 10. It's just like, that's, yeah, you could, if you need that, that's cool. But with pain and freedom and movement, I think that's the linchpin of dysfunction we're talking about, is getting people to build confidence and then be able to self-regulate themselves to understand how they can progress going forward, right? Like, we don't want you to not do a push. I'm not saying you're gonna be able to do 1,000,000 push-ups, but I don't want you to not be able to do a horizontal plane pressing action. Maybe you're not able to get super deep, whatever, right? Like, that's other variables, but like, let's get you out of pain and the fear of doing those things, because, but you know, that's where so many people get stuck. And then the other end, it turns into, let's see how mobile we can get. But like, more mobility doesn't mean less pain either.
No, most of the time it means more pain.
Right. So I think that's the other end. People start looking at this from the pain thing, is like, oh, that was tight, right? Your word tight. So let me start stretching it more. Let me start hammering on it more. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, I don't feel better. I can back bend. I can do, and yoga, I think, is a lot of this. I can do a lot of poses. I can do a lot of things, but my body doesn't be better. Can you touch on that real quick about why flexibility or mobility doesn't necessarily solve that for people?
Absolutely. Well, and I wanted to touch too on your comment about rest. You know, I think rest is good. Rest is important, but people don't understand what rest is. The beginning of an injury, rest, it really should be viewed as safety. Like, you need to reteach your body that you're safe. And so we miss that step. And then like you were saying with the foam rolls and stuff, is if the things you're doing for rest and recovery are painful and uncomfortable, your body is not resting and recovering. It doesn't feel like it's safe, then it's not. Rest and recovery happens when our nervous system feels safe. That is the definition of our parasympathetic nervous system, right? The best way to tap into that is to create safety. So it's like, you know, one of the things I teach a lot is Philip Beach's rest postures, which are seated postures on the floor that our human beings have been doing for millions of years. And we did before we had furniture, right? And it's like, when you're resting on the floor, it's only rest if it's comfortable. So nowadays, since we use furniture, our joints don't go through that full range of motion. So it's like you have to maybe put some bolsters underneath your butt to lift your hips up higher than your knees, to accommodate, to meet the body where it's at so it can rest comfortably. And when you rest comfortably, now you're more likely to improve that range of motion. So then the next time you go to sit, you can take the pillow away. Right? But if you're just forcing it, if you're like, I should be able to sit cross-legged on the floor, upright position, and I'm going to just sit here and stretch it, and it's uncomfortable, then your body's like, I'm never going to grant you that. That's because we're not resting. I don't think this is safe. You're telling me this is not a safe position, so I'm going to hold it as long as possible because you're wanting me to, but I'm on like standby mode the whole time. And so it's like our concept of rest and recovery is like super wonky. And so that in itself provides some issues. And then your other question about the what was the end of it? Because I had an answer for that.
About mobility and
Yes,
how it doesn't
yes,
necessarily, like, more mobility or
yes.
flexibility doesn't
Mo
necessarily lead
mobility.
less pain.
Exactly. So, if you look in the research, the majority of pain and like low back pain, especially research, some of the some of the factors that are most common in people that have these problems are hypermobile people. So people that did gymnastics growing up, or people that are yogis. The hypermobile people tend to actually have the most pain. And oftentimes that is because there is a mismatch between the amount of range of motion that they have available and that their body is aware of and feels safe moving in. And so there's a sloppiness that happens within the joint. And that sloppiness is what starts to break down parts of the joint and create injury to the joint and potential nociception that then could cause injury and pain. And so it's also oftentimes people who are hypermobile like that are hypermobile in certain segments. And so what you'll see is like they might be super hypermobile at L5S1, right at the bottom of the lumbar spine and sacrum, and then really hypermobile at T12 and L1, where the thorax, the rib cage, and the low back start. Really hypermobile at the bottom of the neck and the top of the rib cage. Really hypermobile at the glenohumeral joint, not so, like scapula, not so mobile. Mid thoracic spine, not so mobile. And so what happens is those hypermobile joints, which are usually those transition zones, they become very painful because they're taking the brunt of the movement and the brunt of the load and the pressure associated with movement. And so oftentimes for those people, they appear hypermobile, but if you looked at them segment by segment, they actually have hypermobility and then hypomobility around it. And so getting more specific about the movement and more connected into your fascial tensegrity evens out the movement among all of our segments. And so it's coupled range of motion, and you're more likely to have less pain because you're feeling less pressure. It's like that whole, like from physics, right? Pressure equals area, force divided by area. So the force is always going to stay the same because we're on the planet Earth, and your weight relatively stays the same. But if we can improve the area, increase the area, then the pressure we feel goes down, right? So that is when we learn how to move connected into our core, connected into our fascial tensegrity, all the joints sort of decompress and then move the motion that they need to, right? So then all the motion is distributed evenly, and you can strengthen that, and there's less sloppiness at one specific joint. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah. So that, that's the other thing too with, I've never actually taken an FRC class before, so I can't speak completely. I only see what I see from people of like the cars and some of the pails and rails and stuff like that. But what sometimes is mistaken, I think, and again, I don't know this, you can maybe confirm, is this idea of, it sort of actually originally came from Shirley Sarman in the relative flexibility world of like, you should be able to move your hip joint through a range of motion without your pelvis and your low back coming with you. 100% agree. But at some point, our body actually needs to couple ranges of motion to evenly distribute it throughout our body so we don't get hurt. And so what I see sometimes with people who have gone through and gotten obsessed about the cars, especially, is that now they're creating that hypermobility in the joint and not coupling it within the full system of movement. And so it's like, it's like people are always, these pendulums are always swinging where it's like, joint owning all of your joint mobility, 100% agree. But then like maximizing your joint mobility in your hip is only as good as if you can pair that with what your pelvis and your low back and your knees and your feet are supposed to do, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because if I gain more range of motion in my hip, but I still have my weight posteriorly weight shifted on my knees, then I am now hanging out and even more anterior shearing on the front of my hip joint. And I'm setting myself up for more hip labral and arthritis problems.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, if I can take that range of motion in my hip that I've gotten, shift my weight forward on my feet and untuck my pelvis so I'm sitting on top of my hip, now we have freedom of movement, right? And um, a good distribution of forces through all of the joints to make up the movement pattern that's going to be the least destructive to our joint tissues and therefore probably the less painful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I think, and I've talked to Hunter and Dre and everybody, Dewey about this, and for them, it's like it's great. I like, what more do you want than people to go deep down your system and to see how much you
Oh,
can learn?
absolutely.
And it's like, and there are worse things to promote than better internal rotation of your hips. Does Grandma Betty
Absolutely.
need to be in a shin box to be able to do this much internal rotation? No. And I think people forget that what is good enough and then just a little bit more of a buffer is
Right.
what you really need, right? Like the amount of clubhouses I've been in, and they'll show, like, someone will come up and like, hey bro, what do you think of this person on their Instagram? And like, they can do the splits. Is that going to make me a better fullback, being able to run, lateral change of direction? It's like, not
And right, and
necessarily.
what is the best position for that person to work on those ranges of motion? So many people go into the seated postures and try to work on the hips and stuff, and they don't have the pelvic mobility to sit there in the first place.
Right.
So what ends up happening, they get either hip pain, knee pain, or back pain instead of the improvement of hip range of motion. And so it goes back to the whole point of the rest postures, is like, were you even comfortable in that position in the first place? If you're
Right.
not comfortable in that position, you really have no right trying to move in and out of it.
100%.
And so it's like,
100%.
no, just lift your hips up and then do that shin box thing. There's no shame in that. And that goes back to the ego and like trying to like fit in that, like, well, this person I want to learn from looks this way. And so I want to look that way too, because they must know how to do it. Again, you're outsourcing your trust instead of being like, man, when I just sit down to even try to get in the position for the exercise, this doesn't feel right. So it's like you have a choice in that moment of thinking this doesn't feel right. So it's like, where do you proceed? Well, just going to do the exercise anyways, because I was told that this is what I need to do to improve my hip range of motion. Or you can be like, can I make this more comfortable and then still work on my hip range of motion? And that is like the missing piece, that it's like, it's dumb that it's so simple of a question and an answer. But again, it goes back to like, you've taken the trust away from trusting your body to know that sitting in that position is not comfortable. And you've assumed that because it's not comfortable, you're bad and you should work on it and get better. And it's like that no pain, no gain thing is like, oh my, like, let's let that go. Because that is, if you want to talk about maximizing your mobility and your ability for your body to heal itself, it has to feel safe and happy and ready to move. Like,
It's the message that people don't get, right? Like, because they get caught up in the earlier, like in what they see, the virtue, right? Like, look how high that dude can jump, and like he plays basketball, so I should just do his program. And then it's like, yeah, okay. But then they're like, oh, my coach is trying to get me to work on my big toe, and it's like, well, it's like, well, that dude doesn't need to have he jumps 90 inches in the air despite his big toe not moving. Like, he's that big of a freak. Right? Like, I've seen, like, he doesn't have hips. The kid can't hinge. He can't touch his toes. He's stiff as a board, but he can jump from the free throw line and put his elbow in the rim. I don't know why. And that's athletes, right? Like, when you see these guys, like, I remember Brett Bartholomew posted a video of like an athlete doing a depth jump, and this guy's like knees concave, and everybody's like, oh my God, you let your athlete do that? And then he panned it out, and it was like Jadeveon Clowney. And it was like, but like, look what he does in the field. Like, okay, if it's a problem, then we have to work on it here. Like, it becomes like something to address. But like, these guys are great despite those things, right? But
well, and then that's like, you have a window of time sometimes that, like, because if it was Jadeveon Clowney, I don't know when it was. It's like his durability has been in question. He had like a sports hernia type core injury for the majority of last year that kept him out. And I think even before that, he had some injuries. And so it's sort of one of those things I always tell the athletes, like, if I only have this much of a window with you, like, what are our goals? Are you just wanting to get ready and strong and ready for the season? Well, then you're going to sacrifice some things that are going to maybe prevent injury in the future, right? And I'm not saying that Brett didn't have this conversation with him. I don't know.
Sure.
Like, who knows? Probably, maybe even 20 people had this conversation with him. But at the end of the day, it's the athlete's choice of what they want to focus on.
Right.
You can't want them to focus on durability and like good movement patterns more than they want to. They have to want to improve those things too in order to make a difference. And it's like sometimes it's not that appropriate, and it's like that's the risk that the athletes take with a short window of time. And you look at the timeline that these guys have to get ready and to clean up all the injuries that they had during the season, and it is so short. And it's like no wonder like so many of them get hurt because they're not there. It takes time to change old movement patterns, and it takes time to convince the nervous system that it is safe. Especially when you go to a sport like football, which then every week after convincing the nervous system it's safe, it got that it's, you know, beat up, like got its shit kicked out of it, either from it literally got the shit kicked out of it, or it kicked the shit out of somebody, which requires a state of a nervous system not feeling safe, right? It's a combination state. But it's also like, you know, when I work with my football players, about halfway through the season, their rib cage mobility changes significantly. And it's just, to me, it's like, I just can feel all the trauma that has accumulated in their nervous system and then in like the ligaments of their organs from every impact. And it's just like there's only so much you can do. So it's always like a timeline thing. And that's like, you know, that's the luxury that normal people have is time. Sometimes, you know, we have work and stuff, we don't. And that's the honest conversation I have to have with people sometimes is in terms of like, do I want to do surgery? Do I want to rehab? Or do I want to like just continue on? And I always tell people there's no shame in what you pick. But understanding that you have options, but also understanding what the option is important, right? Like I don't have an ACL in my knee anymore because it retore because I'm super old, and my original surgery was the old surgeries that all failed because they retort on their own. And it's always like I could go get it fixed and probably feel a lot better, but still have the same movement patterns that I need to fix. Or I could take the time and go really slow and get my knee healthier to a point and actually get back to a lot of the activities I wanted to do without an ACL. It takes a lot of dedication though, for me, right? Like, you know, at least 3 or 4 times a week, like carving out time to actually work on it. And most people don't want to commit to that. And it's not like I'm going to feel better in a month. It's like, this is going to be a long process, you know, 6 months to a year, the same that you would have to do in a rehab. And then there's also like, if I'm an athlete and I have a game to play, okay, well, what do we need to do to get back to just be able to play a game? And so then there's also the option of like, do you want to put in the work that it takes after a surgery? Do you want to put in the work that it takes to avoid surgery? Or do you want to just put a Band-Aid on it and try to decrease your pain and work around your function as best as possible? And honestly, a lot of people are in that last option because people don't want to put in the work. And there's no shame in that. But I think as professionals in the healthcare industry, it's important that we are honest with people about what it takes. Like there's a lot of people that go to surgery that probably didn't need to go to surgery, but surgery was the quicker option to get to the goal they wanted. And so, okay, do the surgery then. But then it's like, if you really don't want to do the surgery, it's not like you're doomed. You can actually create change in your body. Like bones can heal, shapes of bones change over time. It's Wolff's Law. Our body is constantly changing shape. It is possible. It's just a long-term commitment that most people don't want to do. So I'm always
I mean,
let's get honest with how much commitment you want to put into your body feeling better or moving better, and what your a realistic timeline is. And for
what's
our
your
professional
advice for
athletes,
people?
their timelines are so small.
For the everyday person, what's your advice? Like between surgery that gets the pain out today or sooner, right?
Right.
Or a rehab program, progressively overloading that range of motion, whatever the sensory input that's needed, right? Like if they're coming to you and they're sitting down like, hey, how do I, like, bulging disc probably is a big one,
Yeah.
right? How do you choose? And like, what information do you want people to know? Like, hey, here's what you're really getting into, and I
Right.
hope this hits a scale for you.
I mean, that's a tough one because the surgeries for disc issues are like 50-50. 50-50, it helps you or if it makes you feel better or not. And I mean, I had back surgery, so I'm like, back surgery was amazing. I was one of the lucky on the 50-50 side that I went in with a foot drop. I left being able to dorsiflex my foot again. And I
Wow.
exchanged like crazy leg pain for back pain from the incision. It was a long recovery after that, but the choice I made, for me, the choice was easy because it was like the longer I went without being able to use my foot, the less of a chance I would never regain that back. But
Right.
in most cases of back and disc stuff, it's just the numbness and tingling. It's not the motor loss. And so it's like doing the surgery doesn't always take care of the numbness and tingling. And so, in that specific situation, what I tell my people is like, this is what the back surgery looks like. This is what a rehab from the back surgery looks like. The back surgery may or may not take care of your pain and your numbness. Here is what not doing surgery looks like. Mm-hmm. So, because at that, like, I can't ever make the decision for somebody because
Right.
there's so much that goes into deciding those factors. Like for some people, it's either financial, like, can I even afford to have the back surgery, right?
Right.
Or can I even afford to do the rehab? Those are like valid questions. And so it's like, I try to lay out the options as best as I can for people and to give them as much information as possible so they can make an educated choice. And then also reminding people, and this is from my experience with surgeries, like as a kid, when a teenager and a 20-year-old, when I got surgeries, my first surgeries, which were knee surgeries, I was under the impression that I get the surgery and I was fixed. But it's like, people need to understand that that's not what surgery does. As soon as we cut into the skin, your tissues change and they will never be the same again. And that's okay because they can still be very functional tissues and very
Right.
helpful, but you don't go back to normal, right? You get one body and that's it. Like, and things heal. Even when it heals on its own, it doesn't go back to normal.
Right.
The fibro, like hyaline cartilage, the cartilage at the end of your bones, when you have a cartilage injury, you never get that cartilage back again. It gets replaced with fibrocartilage, right? And so it's a different type of cartilage. It's completely different. And so I think that, again, because people don't have a real understanding of the human body and human anatomy, they don't understand that. And the doctors, I don't think they're not telling people that on purpose. They just forget. It's so normal to them. They know that. And so they forget to tell the person that. They forget to be like, well, yeah, I'm repairing your ACL, but it's not ever going to be like the original ACL. And then the act of cutting into your joint is totally changing how your brain has mapped it. And you're cutting through superficial nerves. And there's like, so I try to give the athlete or the person is best picture of the surgery that I can. And that's where, like, going back to the role of the athletic trainer, why it's so, like, that physician athletic trainer role is so important for you to have a connection with a physician that you trust, that they can teach you these things or share orthopedic, like I was lucky at a program that we learned a lot of orthopedic surgeries in school. And so it's like, having that has been really helpful to be able to describe to people what goes on. being able to observe surgeries with doctors have been so important for me, so I can be that person that explains to the athlete what's going to happen.
Right.
And because I do believe that in order to be at peace with the decision you make to how to go forward in rehab, you have to have as much information as possible.
Right.
And also permission to change your mind. You might want to try to avoid surgery at first, and you're in it and you're doing the work, and you might get to a point that you're like, man, I don't want to do this. I want to try surgery now. And that's like, okay, let's go. And everyone can be at peace that that's the right decision, because you knew all of the factors from the beginning. You tried one and you didn't love it, and so now you're going to try a different one. Right. So it's like, that's my best advice for people going through it, is gain the information. So if you don't have someone like me who can explain it to you, ask your doctor a bunch of questions. Like, don't rush into surgery. There's not many surgeries that you have to rush to. And so ask as many questions as you can. Seek out different types of professionals or even other athletes who have had those type of injuries, and ask and be like, man, what do you wish you would have asked?
Right. Yeah, I think this is such a unique realm, and there is now information out there that people can understand, because I think people want it. Like, no one wants to be on the IL, right, in life or their sport, right? Like, I feel terrible for the guys that sign big contracts that get hurt. It's like, that dude don't want that. Let me tell you, that person that tears that man or woman person up.
Right.
They're not out there doing the thing they love to do. And then I only think about, like, oh, what if you don't have something that your body's dependent on to do? And it gets really easy just to like, yeah. And then all of a sudden 20 years later, like, ooh, shit doesn't feel good. And then you end up not being able to go do things that you want to do, whether it's that weekend hike with your friends on a weekend getaway, to playing football with your kids as they're getting older, playing cat, whatever that is. But like, we see our bodies. I watch people see their bodies change all of a sudden. They're like, oh shit, it is not the same. Right? Like, I joke going, oh, I miss the days I didn't have to warm up, right? Like, remember being like 9, you're like, I could sprint from here to here and not have to even worry about it. And now you're like, geez, to sprint right now, give me a minute, right? Like, it's going to take me a second.
Right.
But, and that's someone, we move our bodies all the time. Like, sure, I could go run if I had to, but like, I want everybody else to get over this. And I know it's not easy. I say get over this, but provide you the information to help say, okay, here's where I'm at today. It's not impossible. I may not run a marathon tomorrow, but I'm not stuck. I have the ability to change my body. I can change my circumstance. I can improve. Like, I think most people probably operate at like 50%. If we got you to 55%, holy shit, you're going to feel amazing. Right? Like, if you don't move at all, like I Uber a lot because I travel, and like, oh, you look like you work out. What are you doing? I'm like, oh, and then it inevitably becomes, what should I be doing to get in shape?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then it's
walking.
I was like, hey, every 5 rides, walk around the block. That's it. I go, it's 1,000% more than you do right now. And it will be the catalyst that gets you to start doing, because success breeds success, right? And that's why I thought it was so important to talk with you, is like, if pain or any of the other trickle-down effects from pain are the thing that limits us from wanting to go do things, what tool can we give people to say, okay, I get that hurts, right? It doesn't have to hurt forever. Right? There is an opportunity, like, and then you have to choose, is the work worth the squeeze, right? The effort, right? Like, do I want to do shoulder cars every day to like, inevitably, my shoulder feels good. Or am I going to take the time to do some deep, slow breathing at night? Or am I going to take the time to like, do some self-massage, whatever that is. And then as finding different interventions to help you be successful, but helping you at least make that decision on your own, like as we're talking about autonomy, and getting you there. And that's where I think injuries and pain just stop people from getting to do the thing. And most people aren't trying to do the thing of lift the most weights. They just want to be able to do the thing.
They just want to feel good. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people the same thing. Like, if you just want to feel good and you want to start being more active and you want to be more like your younger self, then it lies in ultimately just moving your body more and understanding that rest equals actually safety. And so doing things to promote safety in your body, which is all the stuff we've talked about, spending more time from the floor where it's comfortable. So use pillows and pads as necessary, because when you spend time on the floor, your body will want to change shape. So it promotes movement, right? Our fascia starts to experience creep, which is like a deformation in the tissue quality, the physiology of the tissue, about 19 minutes. And if you sit on the floor, you'll notice, even if it's a posture that's comfortable for you, in about 19 minutes, your body's like, I need to shift, so you're constantly changing shapes. And then the other beauty of spending time on the floor is you have to stand up from the floor. And we call that, most people buy a gym membership to do that, to get down and up from the floor. They call that strength training. Like, that's just built into your day if you spend more time on the floor. And then walking, like, fundamentally, that is like the holy grail of what our body is made to do, is walking, and walking for long distances. And so I too am like, if I get some people that I work with, from like friends of friends or family members that are like, well, I want to start working out. What should I do? And I'm like, you know what? You need to start carving out 30 minutes of your day and walking. And if you can't do 30 minutes, then do like 5 minutes at a time, 6 times. And you go as slow as you need to keep it pain-free and to keep it comfortable. And commit to that for like 30 days. And then after that, you will want to do more. And part of that is like, 1, you start feeling better. And then 2, you're starting to see the progressive successes of committing to doing something for yourself. And it adds up over time, and you feel successful. And then you're like more motivated to keep that success going. And so it's like, then I'll give you some guidance around like movement or strength training. But don't make it complicated. Just start walking. It's free. Everybody has it. Most everyone can do it. Even the most even the person in the most pain can usually walk for short periods of time. Those people who can't walk because of pain or injury, like, okay, then you need to start at physical therapy or with an athletic trainer, like somebody to help you move. Or you need to just start on those rest postures. Figure out a way to be as close to the ground as possible. Move around from there. Add in some rolling. Rolling is like nature's self-massage, right? The floor is the self-massage tool when you roll around it. And so it's like, that is a simple way to start adding in movement, and then maybe you can walk. Another great way to sort of add in walking, if walking's painful, is walk up a hill. Tends to be sometimes less painful. Or backwards walking. Backwards walking unlocks a lot of hip mobility for us, and it is novel to our brains, so it's a little bit fun, and it requires a little bit more connection to our sensory mode as opposed to our automatic mode of our old bad habits of walking. So again, it can be as a controlled environment on a treadmill, right? Like it can, you can even turn the treadmill off and walk backwards. It's great for your quad strength and leg and hip work. And so it's like, that, start simple. Prove that you're ready to make the commitment to move your body more, and then move your body more, right? So.
As we mentioned when we first got on, I mentioned that there a lot of people let great be the enemy of good and from starting. And so if we're talking about walking, I can see that the barrier to entry now becomes, what shoes should I get? Yeah. Right? What I have an ankle thing. From your standpoint, anything you want people to know about shoes? Do they need to get the step up thingies? Do they need to get the whatever? Like, what about foot health? What are we doing here?
Well, foot health, I'd say shoes are not good. So yeah. I would be like, any shoe works. The shoe that is the most comfortable for your foot is the best for you. Doesn't matter what shape it is, what brand it is. Like for me, I feel really comfortable walking in my Vans. I am comfortable barefoot. I get on a like heavier Nike and it's really uncomfortable, or a heavier any sort of foot, uncomfortable. And so it's like, you just have to play around with what's comfortable for your foot. I obviously like a more flexible shoe that mimics what your foot is made to do, which is made of 33 joints. So it's supposed to move in all the directions. And also something that's a little bit more low profile, so you can feel a little bit more from it. But if that's painful to you, then, you know, get as much cushion as you need to, but then you need to commit to like 30 minutes a day cumulative to starting to feel with your foot more. So that's when I pull in the rock mat stuff, and you know, sensing through our feet again, right? We talked about that with the baby. It's like such an important part of us orienting ourselves to our environment and feeling safe. And so using our feet again as the sensory organs they are really important. But that doesn't have to be during your walk. It can be a separate time. It's going to support your walk. So for your walk, whatever shoe is comfortable and protects you from the environment. If your barefoot walking is comfortable and you have grass to walk on or something low risk of getting cut, right? Stepping on something that's going to hurt you, then do barefoot. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Just know that you should, you know, take it easy. Don't go 5 miles right out of the gate when you never barefoot walked before. Right. So, I mean, and that's the thing, like people have this end goal in mind, and remember that like the tortoise wins the race, like baby steps win. So if 30 minutes feels too much for you, just walk until you're like, I'm done walking, see what time it is, do that for a week. And then the next week, add 10% of that time on. So if you walked for 10 minutes, you're adding on 1 minute the next week, and then 1 minute the following week, and then maybe 1.5 minutes the fourth week. So it's like baby steps.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about this rock mat thing, are you just talking about like a cookie sheet with a bunch of rocks on it?
Yeah, a boot tray with loose rocks in it works great. Put it in the shower, or there's commercial products. The downside of the commercial products is they're harder usually, and they're uniform. They don't change. So over time, they become less interesting to your foot. So real rocks are nice because you can change out the rocks. The rocks move around. It's always kind of a different experience.
Yeah.
And you can get different types of rocks, which will feel different for your foot. And again, just like the rest postures, it needs to be comfortable. It can't be painful. It needs to be interesting. So I have a bunch of rock mats, different various commercial ones, as well as trays I've made, or I'll glue rocks onto different mats, and I'll have my athletes feel all of them. And I say the one that you're drawn to return to is the one for you.
Nice.
Like trust that little kid instinct of what are you drawn to go feel. And then they'll be like, well, how long do I do it? Until it's not interesting to your foot anymore. Right? So ideally, it's suggested to put them in places in your house that you're already standing. So it's built in. Like I have it in front of my bathroom sink, and sometimes I have one in my shower. So between taking a shower and doing my hair in the morning, like that's already like 40 minutes I've stood. It's like adding that into my life was like a game changer for my back pain and for my ankle mobility. And it was really, for me, back when I was really deconditioned and in a lot of pain from my back and my knee, it was the one thing that I implemented that made a huge difference in being able to feel safe again in my body to start moving and I noticed like within 3 days of doing it, I went from having back pain waking up in the morning to no back pain in the mornings. And then after 2 weeks of rock mats, I went from having pain in my knee while walking down the stairs of my apartment to no pain walking down the stairs in my apartment. And it was just like mind blowing because I had access to all these other tools that I was doing and it wasn't helping me. And so that was like my first venture into like understanding how important our sensory organs were in making us feel safe and priming our body for movement. And that's like all of the work from Philip Beach, who wrote the book Muscles and Meridians, that like learning from him was really the missing piece of putting together all this other information that I've learned over the years from all the greats. So
that's amazing. What I love is it's so accessible, right? So
yeah,
you know, it's right there. And I'm thinking about like, oh, what a great thing just to put around your house, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense. Like we wear foot prisons all the time, right? Like is Dre Spinning would always say in his thing, but like shoes, right? Like we put, like you mentioned kids shoes early, like you put kids, like cute, but like that's so important for us to get them out. And like, I just remember as a kid, like how tough I could run across gravel driveway, not care. Yeah. Now I'm like, oh God, if I step on something. So for like you new parents out there, dump a tray of Legos. No. And like, it's like, that Legos are too painful, right? But like being able to like build that tolerance up to your feet, being able to handle those inputs is like up the chain, right? Safety up the chain, what you feel and touch, if your feet never touch the ground, right? Like, I think that, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And what an easy thing you guys can do at home for a trip to Home Depot for $5 and a hot glue gun.
And I mean, it goes back to that talk about surface area too. Like the best way to increase the surface area of your foot, like using the whole surface area of your foot, which is basically shifting your weight forward, is to step on something like that. Because if you step on that and you mainly have all your weight on your heel, it's going to hurt like crazy because the pressure is going to be through the roof because the surface area is small. So it forces you to shift your weight forward. So how it relates to low back pain, besides the sensory component of the nerves influence those deep rotators and stabilizers of the back, is that when you shift your weight forward on the rocks, you'll feel your butt relax and untuck. You won't even be noticing that you've been a tight ass and holding your butt so tight until you step on the rocks and you feel everything relax as you shift yourself forward. And in that moment, your pelvis tips back into a more neutral anterior tilted position and your low back regains its curve, which puts less pressure on the discs. And it's like, it feels so good. And it connects us when we're shifting our weight forward on our feet. We're more connected into our fascial tensegrity. We decompress our joints and like we have our dynamic alignment. And so, yeah, the rock mats are so powerful.
And so guys, when she's talking about putting your foot on the rock mat and putting pressure on it, it's not, don't put all your weight on one foot on a rock and it's like jamming into the fascia of the bottom of your foot, right? Like you're dosing weight. You're transitioning your foot, like, all right, more toe action. Yes. And like that's the amount of tension. But remember her earlier point around it shouldn't be painful. So you're dancing with the rocks. You're not just like having to stand there and like it's not a willpower game and that muscle is gonna relax. It's like doing it over time. That input from like, oh, my foot doing this, like, and like, I mean, this is a whole different long show. Like the big toes enrollment and everything is like up the chain is like, oh yeah, that thing's really important. But just getting your feet to understand that, I think is so key. Where can people learn more about like what content you're putting out? Like, I mean, there's a lot of information that I think people just aren't aware of, especially from athletic training or just this in general. How do people learn more about what's going on and pick up what you're putting down?
Yeah. So my Instagram is where I put the majority of my content. And that's at Movement Rev, REV. And then my website, movementrev.com, has all the stuff. You can sign up on my email list. I send out stuff like that. I have actually in November, I'm rolling out a monthly membership specifically for rest and recovery. It's a regen membership because this is it. Athletes and coaches, especially sports coaches who work with athletes, don't know what to do for their athletes on recovery days. And their athletes are wanting to know how to take care of their aches and pains. And so this is sort of my way of putting this out in the world for athletes and coaches. But I mean, a ton of great free content on Instagram.
Do you have to be an athlete to do your program in November, or can you just be an everyday?
You can be an everyday. Yeah. I mean, I'm targeting it towards athletes because that's like what inspired me. But yeah, I mean, if you want to learn about your body and learn how to take care of it, then it's going to be your jam. There'll be like 2 recorded regen sessions a month from me, which are about 45 minutes of just like a Wednesday regen day, how to feel safe in your body and move your body through all the ranges of motion sort of thing. And then downregulate the nervous system. And then there'll also be like videos joint by joint. So if you're like, man, my hips are feeling really tight, my ankles are tight, you can choose your own adventure through that. And then there'll also be like sample programs that, over the years when athletes are like, my shoulder hurts, what should I do? Like, these are the things I would do. These are the things I would do. And then also there'll be a way to submit questions, and then a monthly sort of short learn about your body segment of like getting the bones out, see what it's like, palpate it on yourself. So there's going to be, learning about your body. There's body scans for you to do that check-in before and after to start to learn that body awareness and gain that trust. And then exercises to create recovery and rest for you. So yeah, anybody, rolling out at the beginning of November. So I'm super excited about it. It's been a idea brewing for the last couple of years, and finally, thanks to coronavirus, have the time to put into it. So
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing watching what people did with their time during this, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
oh, this is how I can utilize not being in person. And like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the push that someone like you who's busy all the time in person, like can like, oh, take a really nice reset and do, because the online scaling thing, but it's hard when you're in demand in person all the time. You're like, man, it's really hard to
It is hard. Yeah.
justify spending the other time.
Absolutely. And it is one of those things too. Like, I really want to help all levels of athletes and people. And the majority of people cannot afford my price point for one-on-one services.
Totally.
And so I want to be able to have lower cost offerings, but are just as valuable. And so this was a way that I could sort of like capture it to be really powerful for the layperson, or for an athlete who just doesn't have support services, like my professional athletes are used to having. So
right, which is most people, right? Like
yes.
most athletes don't even get a U until like the pros,
No.
and even then, like some teams don't have them, and you're
Yeah.
like, so just because you see these athletes on TV, like a lot of them are fending for themselves, and the amateur right before that level are really fending for themselves.
By themselves. Yeah, exactly. So
thank you so much for spending some time with us and teaching us all about recovery, return to play, pain, and what we can do to take the next step and at least get our bodies moving, right? And going from there. And then we can self-select what the next journey is. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Please check out Anna's work. She's here for a reason. She's an expert at what she does, and was so thankful to have time with you and to learn, and appreciate it, and looking forward to coming down to San Diego and seeing you guys soon.
Yes. Thank you so much. It's been so fun.
Awesome. Bye, Anna. Thank you.
Bye.